The last time there was a meeting this highly anticipated between the leaders of the United States and Russia, President Trump set off an earthquake with what he said as he stood shoulder to shoulder with the Russian president after they had emerged from hours behind closed doors in Helsinki.
Asterisk the last time there was a highly anticipated meeting between the leaders of the United States and Russia. President Trump set off shockwaves with what he said as he stood shoulder to shoulder with the Russian president after their hours-long closed-door session in Helsinki. Asterisk, but this time here in Anchorage at a hastily arranged summit in Alaska. The major fallout tonight is because of what wasn't said. Asterisk, I will say that I believe we had a very productive meeting. There were many points that we agreed on, most of them, I would say. A couple of big ones we haven't quite resolved yet, but we've made some headway. So, there's no deal until there's a deal. I will call up NATO shortly. I will call up the various people I think are appropriate, and of course, I'll call President Putin and tell him about today's meeting. Ultimately, it's up to them, and I have to agree with Marco, Steve, and some of the great people from the Trump administration who've come here. Scott and John Ratcliffe, thank you very much. We have some of our really great leaders here, and they've been doing a phenomenal job. Asterisk, the president mentioned several of his senior staff, but there was no mention of a ceasefire or severe sanctions conditions he had previously suggested would come into play if things didn't go as expected today. Asterisk, so what exactly happened in that room? That's something we are only beginning to piece together tonight, as the president, for his part, tried to spin the outcome as best he could. Asterisk, I'm going to start making a few phone calls and tell them what happened. But we had an extremely productive meeting, and many points were agreed upon. There are just a very few that are outstanding. Some are not that significant. One is probably the most significant, but we have a very good chance of getting there. We didn't get there today, but we have a very good chance of getting there. Asterisk, the president made it clear no deal with Putin was reached on a ceasefire, and he left Anchorage just a few moments ago without the result he had wanted in hand. Asterisk, the day began with plenty of pomp and somewhat awkward circumstances, as American service members in uniform quite literally rolled out the red carpet for someone who has long been considered a global pariah. President Trump greeted President Putin with a hearty handshake before they rode together to the meeting. That car ride, about 10 minutes, was apparently the only time the two leaders were alone together. Asterisk, originally, the schedule had called for a one-on-one meeting with two advisors each in the room, Secretary of State Marco Ruiz and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff with the U.S. President, but at the last minute, the plan was changed and the leaders met differently than expected. Asterisk, the two leaders spent about 6 hours together in Anchorage. The Russian president seemed perfectly content with delaying progress on peace in Ukraine, repeating long-standing grievances about the conflict. At the end, he even floated an idea for the next meeting. Asterisk, so again, Mr. President, I'd like to thank you very much. We'll speak soon and probably see you again very soon. Asterisk, thank you very much, Vladimir. And next time in Moscow. Oh, that's an interesting one. I'll get a little heat on that one. I could see it possibly happening. Asterisk, and with that, the two parted ways. Asterisk, my lead sources are here to start us off tonight in Anchorage. CNN's chief national security analyst, Jim Ciuto, is with us. Asterisk. Asterisk, also, former CNN Moscow bureau chief Joel Doherty is joining us. And Joe, I'll get to you because I can't wait to hear your thoughts on what you saw playing out. Asterisk, but Jim, watching that and listening to it, I mean, we were in the room there. Was this sense of anticipation because they moved us pretty quickly to our seats? Then both leaders gave unusually short remarks, which, as you know, is not typical for either of them. Reporters were standing up, shouting questions. And then President Trump turned and left the stage. What does that say to you? Jim Ciuto. Well, listen, by President Trump's own measure of success for the summit, it was a failure. He wanted a ceasefire. He didn't get a ceasefire, and he didn't announce one there. Is it possible that in the next several days or weeks we might see progress? Yes, but he didn't get it in this meeting. No one begrudges his efforts to do that, least of all the Ukrainian people, who are desperate for peace and to end the onslaught they've endured for years. But in this moment, he did not move President Putin off his core interests. Trump seemed to believe that by force of personality alone, just getting face-to-face with Putin, he could strike a deal. That calculation failed in the moment. And you heard it in President Putin's comments before Trump spoke, phrases we've heard from him from the very beginning. He talked about addressing the root causes of the war. The second he said root causes, that was code for "it's your fault I invaded." I invaded with justification because of a threat from the West, from NATO, and so on. The other familiar phrase he used was about addressing Russia's core national security interests. And to him, that means an independent, free, westward-leaning Ukraine is a threat to Russia. He does not want that to happen. There was also a comment he made about hoping European leaders wouldn't torpedo whatever it is they discussed. They never really laid out what that meant, but clearly, it crossed some red lines for European leaders. Now, I'll say this, European officials I spoke with before this meeting feared Trump might cut a deal over Ukraine's head and over Europe's head, agreeing to something they weren't comfortable with. That didn't happen. Trump did say he would check in with his NATO allies and with the Ukrainian president. He also said no land swaps would happen without Ukraine's approval. So the worst fears in Europe didn't materialize, but Trump's hopes certainly weren't realized either. Jill Doherty. You're our former Moscow bureau chief. How do you think Putin is leaving this meeting? What are the Russians talking about on their flight back right now? Jill Doherty. Well, I mean, he leaves happy. Things looked good, the pomp and circumstance you mentioned. The Russians love that. I think they're perceiving this as a win for Mr. Putin. But if you get into the substance, rather than the optics, he did talk about root causes. No question that's a red flag. There were also a couple of cryptic comments about working on security issues. Not quite clear what he meant, if I heard him correctly. He talked about not throwing a wrench into anything. Put that together with what we've been hearing from Europeans, this idea of some kind of coalition of the willing forces that could serve as peacekeepers or monitors. Maybe that's what he was hinting at. We'll have to wait for details. But overall, I think Putin came away with exactly what he wanted, kicking the can down the road. No real definition, and continuing to frame the narrative around those so-called root causes. Jill Doherty. Jim Ciuto, thank you both for that expert analysis. I also want to check in from Ukraine. That's where CNN's Nick Patton-Walsh is living KYV right now. Nick, we were just leaving the military base where Trump and Putin met. We watched Putin take off. And then Air Force One departed, presumably. Trump is calling Zelensky from that flight back to Washington. Have you heard any reaction there so far to today's summit and how abruptly it ended? Nick Patton-Walsh. No. I mean, obviously. It's incredibly late here, but so far, silence. You might imagine that call could happen soon. But look. Some of Trump's comments suggested there may have been an idea or proposal floated. Something he wanted to put to Zelensky, saying it would be up to him to decide, and that he also needed to explain it to European allies. Still, judging by Trump's posture and gestures, he didn't expect success. It feels like Putin may have floated a peace proposal that Trump immediately knew wasn't going anywhere. That could explain Putin's slightly threatening remark about hoping Europeans wouldn't block progress. But there's one clear victory for Putin here outside of the red carpet rehabilitation on the world stage. That made many Ukrainians grimace as they saw him sitting alongside Trump. And that's time. Time is crucial. If Putin can buy another month or two, he can delay the secondary sanctions that are weighing heavily on Moscow. Those sanctions became far more urgent after calls from India and China signaled concerns. That's why he agreed to this bilateral meeting, day by day. Every bit of time matters. And that's the pace at which villages are changing hands, places you've probably never even heard of. But slowly, the more of them that fall to Russia, the greater the potential for a strategic shift along the front line. In the Donetsk region, long seen as a key battleground, U.S. Special Envoy Steve Witkoff was told by the Kremlin that they wanted Ukraine to voluntarily withdraw from the area in exchange for a ceasefire. But week by week, more of that territory is slipping into Russian hands. It's unclear when the tipping point will come, but several key towns along the front line are now under intense Russian pressure. Putin may only need until the end of September or early October to turn some of his current military advances into a much wider effect. And he certainly seems to have bought himself more time. Caitlin,